Hi, Chaim. So tell me a little bit about what you do and where your background, where you're from.
So currently, I'm a therapist. I'm based in Cleveland, but I see people online, um, basically anywhere. I see men only. The issues that I work with are, I guess, a variety. There's a lot of marital issues. I don't do couples counseling, but I do work on the marital issues with the man, addictions, um, anxiety, ADHD, stress. A lot of what your stress is sort of a catch-all term, but everything that's so overthinking, insomnia, feeling inadequate, work stress, career stress, and definitely spirituality. So that's the gist of the type of stuff that I do.
Cool. And tell me a little bit about, the world that you came from and why you chose this path as a career for yourself.
Yeah, so that's a it's a loaded question. So I grew up in Muncie. I went to the to yeshiva. I guess yeshiva should be the best term for to describe the background. So I went to Philly, Passaic for Mesivta, Philly, David Soloveitchik, BMG, and then a Kale in Cleveland. Um, I learned Kale until I was 31. And I guess I'm going to try to give you an abridged version of how did that shifted. So at one I was 31 and I was on the trajectory to be, to like try to become Magachir, get a stellar within that realm. And then I had an opportunity to open a yeshiva. Somebody was going to be funding it, and that made me really think, like, is this what I want to do? And it opened up it really made me think a lot more, a lot deeper than I was thinking prior. You know, really, is this really what I'm cut out for? This is what I want to do? And the answer was no. The conclusion I came to is no, and that sort of led me to becoming a therapist. Why therapy? Um, since I was a kid, I thought I was going to be a therapist. I took like a 15-year break when I went to yeshiva, but then that was sort of like the natural choice. I had like a couple of minutes, not a, or a couple of days, whatever, that I was thinking like maybe I should become a lawyer because I have that side. I love to debate. Um, that's definitely part of what I used. That side of myself was very active when I was in Kyle. You were fighting with your chavrusa, debating. I'm analytical, so I have that side, but I chose therapy because I thought it'd be much more meaningful. Definitely is.
Fascinating. What was it like that moment where you started to realize that this thing that you were doing for 15 years that seemed like it was going to be your career, all of a sudden, this part of you jumped up and was like, wait a second, do I want this? What was that like?
Yeah, it was very intense. So it's not that I didn't want to do it. I really enjoyed, and I was very engaged in learning all the years. But part of being in that system is that there's an automatic trajectory that your next step is this. Your next step is you're going to get a stellar, you're going to be a mega chair. And I didn't think that through enough because I was enjoying what I was doing. I enjoyed learning. I was into it. Um, so taking the next step was what it was like, hey, is this, it was a hard question because I did enjoy it. But what I realized is this is not what I want to do with my whole life. Not that I don't want to learn, of course I do. I just don't want to spend my entire day learning, and not necessarily do I want to use my day teaching Gemara, that. So what was that like? That was your question. The whole thing was probably about a month, but that month was very intense. A lot of stress, a lot of inner conflict. Um, before I before I did it, I needed to speak to someone that I could trust to really sort through because a lot of it was very deeply held beliefs about what's important in life, what my priorities are. Um, Definitely a lot of the education that I had, which some of it I think is 100% spot on, but some of it needed to be tweaked. So to sort through a lot of the stuff that arose, I went to Reb Aaron Lapiansky. Are you familiar with him?
No.
So he's a Rosh Hashiva in Greater Washington. Brilliant. He's really brilliant. He gives shiurim on lots of different things. He's really he's very intellectual, but he's very real. And he's Rosh Hashiva. So he had, all the hashkafic issues that I want to discuss with him. He would be the right person. So I called him up and he told me you got to come down. So flew into Washington
Wow.
and I had a 3.5 hour, maybe it was 4 hour conversation with him.
My goodness. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And after that, I was like, all right, I'm becoming a therapist. So from like it was the beginning of it was the beginning of where I was thinking about being a yeshiva. By the end of Elzman, I decided that I'm not, and I'm moving on and becoming a therapist. So it was a very intense month.
I can imagine. And it's incredible that did you have a relationship with him before that?
No, I never had a relationship with him, but I've listened to Shiurim for years, and I knew from listening to him that he would be the right person.
Incredible. That
Yeah,
you knew he'd be the right person and that he was like he gave you, you can see he wasn't just going to give you an answer over the phone and he gave you that much time. That's a
yeah, yeah. It was amazing. I recorded it, and it was very
really,
hard. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't share the recording. There was a lot of
yeah.
there's definitely some personal. There was a lot of soul searching that went through, that happened to come to that decision. But I needed somebody that would be very real,
Hmm.
because I know any Rosh Hashiva would, could be to say, yeah, you could, it's okay, blah blah blah. I wasn't looking for that. I had a lot of questions based on things that I've learned about over the years, like hashkafa questions about what my tafkid is, what's the, very, very intense, life-altering questions that I needed answered without fluff. So he was definitely the right person, no question.
Is there anything about that conversation that you can share, specifically in terms of how it really, what was really surprising to you, what came out, what you learned from it?
So I'll be honest, it's been so many years, I don't even remember so many of the details. Let me think if I can remember anything. I mean, if I listen to the recording,
Hmm.
I'm also light years away from that in the way I think now. If I was in that position now, I wouldn't have the question. It would be glaringly obvious, but that's been part of my own growth journey. Um,
So explain that. That's interesting.
yeah,
Why would it be glaringly obvious now when it wasn't then?
that's a good question. At the where I was coming from, the one thing that mattered most was limanatera, right? That was really like the beginning and end of spirituality. So from that place to make and I enjoyed learning. I still enjoy learning. It's not like I don't enjoy it. So then I know how to do it well. I enjoy it. So then the question that I had to ask myself is why wouldn't I be doing this with my life? Right? It's
Yeah,
very
tough
if
one.
so from the belief system that this is the only thing that really matters in life, why would you not do it? On the other hand, a part of me was like, I don't think this is what I'm cut out to do. I'm cut out to learn, but not that I want to spend the rest of my life either learning 14, 15 hours a day or teaching. So that's what I needed help with, that hashkafic question, and that's what he helped me with. At this point, I want to ask it because I don't see that as being what spirituality is. I think that is a path. I just don't think that there is one path for that sort of, I don't think there's one path that everybody can follow. Everyone has their own unique path. So then to me, it's obvious that that's not mine. It's a part of my path. It's not that limiter is not important. It's just that my own journey does not include 14 hours a day of learning. It's sort of
Got it.
obvious. But from the
Got it.
place that I was coming, it was mind blowing.
Yes. I think that that's even something that within the Torah observant community, there's different hashkafa about. Is it all about learning, or is there other things? And you said you came from like a yeshiva's background, so I'm curious, hashkafa wise, what did you learn from him from that conversation? Like, what was what he taught you out of that conversation of the hashkafa of what it's all about? And then after that, what is the realization that you have come to over the years of what spirituality is really all about?
Yeah, you're asking some really good questions.
I
Um,
try.
yeah. So again, I don't remember all the details now. I don't remember all the details. I think the main point was the understanding that I came out from that conversation was that there's a real ideal of Limud Torah, but the way that culturally it's been incorporated is very, very black and white. So either you're a Gadol Hadar, learning 24 hours a day, huge mass, but again, I'm exaggerating it, but I need to just to bring out the point. So it's very black and white. Either you're full-time learning big mass mid, that's your entire life, or you're not spiritual. It's either or. I think that was what I came away the most. Like the conversation made me realize that the way that culturally it's been incorporated is very black and white and has nothing to do with what spirituality is. At that point, that helped me a lot to make the decision. Okay, so then this is if it doesn't need to be all or nothing, then there's something else that there's more that can be incorporated into my spirituality. So then that opened up the door for me to say I'm moving on. That also opened the door for an entirely new perspective on spirituality.
Mhm.
Um, Could you remind me the question? Because I'm getting involved in this point. What was the question again? Just remind me the question.
Yes, no. So you answered the first question, which was, what did you glean from him? Is the
Yes,
approach, which is that Limud Torah is a quintessential value, like it's huge, but the adoption of it, like it's black and white, like either you're in or you're out. Either you're
right.
doing it your whole life or you're just on the outside, is not really the truth. Um,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
that gave you the ability to explore.
Yes.
And then through that exploration, you've come to the realization that what really is spirituality to you.
So so I think spirituality is different for everybody, but I think there's certain concepts or there's certain benefits or concepts that are applicable to everyone. Um, it's interesting. Rabbi Lobansky just came out with a brand new book called Ben Yeshiva, and he says some things there that are also pretty revolutionary, at least for the yeshiva community. Not for we've talked about David Aaron in the past. It's not. It's sort of very basic from that perspective, but spirituality is very internal. The way he frames it, I like it a lot actually. Um, I don't know if he says guf, nefesh, and seichel. It's all there's different terms for the same stuff, but there's three levels. There's the outer level of ourselves, which is there's three. Well, there's a few outer levels. One outer level is what he's calling guf, drives, cravings, instinctive desires. Then there's I think nefesh, which is the emotional realm. So it can be um, the ego, what would be called in psychology the ego, whether it's fear, whether it's the need for validation, arrogance, basically anything that has to do with the psyche. Um, and the deepest level, what he calls seichel, or you call it neshama, is whatever spiritual discipline you're learning. You'll probably have a different term for it, but that's your core essence. Your core essence is your soul. So cultivating that is what spirituality is. Bringing out that part of yourself, developing it, and having that side of yourself being manifested in your life and leading your life. That's what I think spirituality is. I think everybody's gonna have their own way of framing it, probably getting to the same place. That's the way I think of it. Um, and there's many paths to cultivate it. So I have a lot of friends who learned for many years, and some of them still are. And I think that for them, that was their path because they're bringing out that side of themselves, the part of themselves that's most godly. Um, it's interesting. He's a Litvish Rosh Hashiva or Blabyansky, but the concept seems to be across the board. The side of ourselves that's most spiritual is the side of ourselves that is a part of God. So we're basically trying to bring out the godliness that we have inside ourselves. That's sort of like in a very broad way, the way I understand it.
Mhm.
Um,
So how does someone who had the choice to learn all the time but didn't, how do you find how that is more godly for you than learning would be?
Say that again. Not sure I understood the question.
So how how do you understand the idea that for you, choosing your path was more godly than learning Torah all day long?
because that's what my essence is. Because it's not what I meant to do. For me, being godly means to do what to use the strengths that I have. This is a part of it. I think it's there's a lot. There's my personal life, how I act in my personal life, and then professionally, or in um how I bring myself into the world is a whole separate area. It's all part of the spiritual picture. But for me, this is what I think my skill set is. So then that's how I can, if I can use that to be of help to another person or to many people, then that's using the godly side of myself.
So if a person basically takes, so you're saying is that like if a person takes inventory of what their talents are, where their strengths are, where they feel like they can be the most value to other people in the world, that's their God-given talent. That's the godly side of who they are.
Yes. At least in their profession, I don't want to say professional because that limits it, but in what you're doing with your day, then there's how you interact with others as a husband, as a father, with friends. That's a whole on a personal realm, there's a whole
Mm,
separate, it's not so separate, but it's a separate equation, right?
right.
But professionally, when there's what are you doing with your day? What are you doing with your career? Using the strengths that you have to be, I don't want to say of service, I don't like that word so much, but to use it to be of benefit is that's right. That's what God is the epitome of a giver. So for you to use your skill set is using that side of yourself. You're using that's the giving side of yourself in the way that you're intended to, because that's what you were cut out to do.
Okay. So now we have your story, which is how you became a therapist, which is very interesting because it was really kind of driven by this spiritual question of like what I'm really here to do. Um, and part of the reason why we're having this discussion is that, I've been following you for a while on LinkedIn and I've seen your stuff. And recently you've been writing a lot about spirituality. And that caught my attention because I've long been really fascinated with the intersection of spirituality and mental health. And when we first had a conversation about this, it was almost like bouncing like similar ideas, like one after the other. It was just like light bulbs lighting up. Um, so now let's understand from your perspective, what it's been like for you to see how the field that you went into, that you felt spiritually was what you were meant to do, mental health, how that intersects with spirituality and why that's so important, both on the mental health side and on the spiritual side.
I think there's two areas where it comes up most. One is how misunderstanding spirituality causes a lot of mental health problems. That's one area. The second area is how um, clarity and connection to spirituality can be very helpful. Not very helpful, it's actually indispensable to healing. So the first thing is misunderstanding spirituality causes mental health problems. I'll give you an example of a client that I'm working with right now. And this comes up a lot. So this guy, um, he's learned Kaggle for a lot of years. His expectation from himself, what he needs to do in learning, is completely unrealistic. Um, that he needs to accomplish. He has to be a master Talmid Chacham. He can't wait. If he does, then it's Bittul Torah. I mean, there's a lot of different detail, but it's causing him a lot of anxiety and a lot of pain. He feels like a failure. He feels inadequate. But the core point of it is that his belief of spirituality is that it's dependent on something external. So the barometer of whether he's connected to spirituality is how many hours did he learn, or how good is he in learning. So by definition, that's not spirituality. Learning could be spiritual, but it's a tool to develop and bring out the godly part of you. I mean, Nefesh HaChaim, which is the sort of like what's the word, magnum opus on, Limud Torah being your connection to God. I think he says that's, very, very explicitly. But if people look at any aspect of spirituality as sort of like a to-do list, so then there's going to be a lot of mental health problems because you're never going to be adequate in your own eyes. If spirituality is defined by something external, how much you learn, so then you never learn enough. There's always people learning more. You should be doing it 24 hours a day. You should be never wasting a second. How come you don't know it the way you could? There's no end to it. So that causes a lot of mental health problems because you're defining yourself and your spirituality based on something that has nothing to do with you. That's one area where I think they're very linked.
Why do you think
Um,
that that is so damaging? What happens to a person when they start to choose an external source as their barometer of success or whether they're good enough? What starts to happen?
well, anytime that you're going to define it's more than just success, it's your value. So if your value has nothing to do with you, you're going to feel pretty bad about yourself. The way we feel good when what we are is valuable. So if it's nothing to do with you, it has to do with an external set of actions. I think by definition, even if you do those well, you're not going to feel good because you're cutting yourself off. You're not bringing yourself into the picture of what value is. Whereas if spirituality is about cultivating yourself, so then you're going to feel very good because whoever you are and whatever your gifts or weaknesses are, that's part of your value. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if I'm saying it clearly.
Yeah, I think the word that comes up for me is like intrinsic. You know,
Yes.
you know, if we need to feel value, but value is not intrinsic to us, so in essence, we're desperately needing something that we don't intrinsically have. It's almost like you need air to breathe, but air is now a scarce resource that you might get or you might not. So you're on high alert all the time.
Yes. Yeah. So I do think like if let's say somebody grew up and they had a perfect childhood, which nobody did, but in a perfect world, right? If you had a perfect childhood and you don't have any genetic or personality dispositions to mental health issues, some people might have that they might have that very good, strong sense of inherent value and worth without having to explore spirituality. They just have it by default. So they have a sense of that, that inherent value without having to explore it. But most people, there's something lacking in that area in the area of their inherent value and self-worth. Not that their value is missing, their connection to that inherent value is missing. So there's many paths to it, but spirituality can be a very important one.
How so?
So I think spirituality, at least for me, and I think that this is, sort of a fundamental aspect of spirituality for everybody, although they're going to have a unique path to it. There's two parts to spirituality that are very impactful for mental health. One is your perspective on life. Like, what are you doing here? What's the point? What's the goal? I don't mean goal in terms of like, how do I going to make money? The big picture of like what's the purpose of you being in this world and what are you trying to accomplish? Why are you here? Getting that very clear is very spiritual because those are your values. So like, are you here because is personal growth part of what your mission in this world is? If it is, it's going to give context to everything that you do. So let's say this comes up all the time let's say someone's in a difficult marriage. So psychology can be helpful in learning how to deal with that, right? Depending if you're going to couples counseling, you're trying to bring real intimacy and real connection. Sometimes it's not possible, and sometimes the person has to either decide to leave or make peace with it. But why should they? Why should they want to, right? So they can learn how to. Why should they want to? Psychology is going to help you learn how to do it. You have to have a reason to do it. So if you have a big picture of like where you headed in life, what's the point? So then that will give you a very strong reason. If part of it is to be a better person, to be a more loving person, to be a more giving person, so then you can find a lot of meaning and satisfaction in the marriage, even if the spouse is not what you wanted, in terms of your own emotional needs. I'm saying a very extreme example because I think that brings up the point. It's very relevant even when you're in a happy marriage because you need to have a big picture for how to deal with the things that you don't want, enjoy, that get you upset. because psychology will give you tools how to deal with it, but you have to have a very real reason to deal with it. Why should you? Why not just, try to get your way all the time? Besides not being effective, you have to have a bigger goal and a bigger, more spiritual drive for your life that gives context to all the smaller things that come up. I think that's one area. The second one is one that you were talking about before, your inherent value. So psychology, therapy is very, that's a basic principle that's needed in healing is that you have inherent value despite, not despite, that your actions cannot affect. But that's a very difficult concept, especially for some people. It's like, what do you mean? Let's say, I'm working with a sex addict, and he's done some things that he really regrets. So he feels. So what is his inherent value? So if he believes that his essence is a part of God, so then all his actions, they could be bad actions, or use whatever term you want, unhelpful, but he can never affect his essence because his essence is not his. His essence is a part of God. So that means he inherently has an value regardless of what he's done. That can be very powerful because you still need a lot of work to access that. But if you have to first believe that it's the truth, or maybe you don't, but some of the work will lead you to that. But there has to be something that's objective. You can't just say like, you have inherent value worth. People are saying like, well, no, I'm not. Like, it's ridiculous. Who decides that? Why? Right? And psychology doesn't have a good answer for that. It really doesn't. There has to be a spiritual answer to that. And then psychology can help you access that spiritual truth. So I think both in terms of your perspective, context for your life, and giving yourself a reason why you should grow, why you should deal with hard stuff in a way that's, that aligns with your bigger purpose, but also having that self-esteem, what's called self-esteem or self-worth, that itself is really based on a very spiritual concept.
As you're talking about that, there's an image that comes to my mind of how, we're built as people, which is that we have a very real, tangible life with things that we do that are important, whether we do them or we don't them or how we do them. And then we have this spiritual core essence of like who we really are and what we're really about. And a lot of what we do in our life is almost to try to, how can we express in what we do that core essence of who we are? And it's like when we look at spirituality, we see more that core essence. And when we look at mental health, we see like, how do I do what I do well? How am I going to be a functioning person? But it's like, if those two things are operating in separate realms, they don't work that well. Because, like you said, it's like, well, spirituality seemed like it was learning all day. But for me, it wasn't. It was doing something else because my spiritual essence had to come down into who I really am as a person. And then when we try to kind of fix who we are as people and we go on the mental health side, well, if who I am as a person is not connecting to a deeper part of who I am, then all this how to fix stuff, like, why would I even bother? Like, what does it matter? Like, it's got to be
Yes,
channeling a deeper thing.
yes. You said it really well. They can't be separate. If they're separate, you're not going to get anywhere. Those two need to be joined together because you can't be happy, healthy emotionally without having, the full picture.
Right.
I think it comes in increments. I don't think it's linear. It's like, all right, let's do this, then we accomplish the mental health, then the spirit. I think it's all, it's up and down, and at different times there's different aspects of it that need to be addressed. But the picture as a whole needs to be addressed versus a little piece of it. Because if you have one piece without the rest of it, then you're not going to get anywhere.
So share with us a story maybe of, a journey of a client of yours of what they were going through and how these pieces started to come together and what that looked like and what you felt like, you know, I guess that's the question really. Like paint a picture of how you could have someone who started at this place with all these things and then as you worked on both the pieces of how the mental health, but also the spiritual, how that came together and what that resulted in.
I have a few. I have to be careful because you know, I have to
Obviously.
make sure I'm trying to think how to keep the details discreet. Um, the one I mentioned before, so a lot of anxiety and feeling not good about himself because of, because of the way he defines spirituality. I mentioned him before. I don't think there's a lot to that story. There's a history of sexual abuse. There's a lot of trauma. I don't think the learning is the only piece. But he's doing very well right now, and there's no way for him to get to where he was without redefining his spirituality. I don't think spirituality was his only issue, that he saw that his only goal in life is to learn all day. But so there's a lot of trauma work that he needed. But as long as he believed that that's what his spirituality is, then by default, he also, without realizing it, has to perceive God a certain way. What type of God wants you to do something that you can't do, or that's miserable? Not a very nice God. I'm using very simplistic terms because that's the way it feels. So God's a very demanding, angry, scary guy that if you do all the right things, then you'll get some good stuff. But if you fall short, you're in trouble. Now, I don't, most people are not conscious of that being their perception, but if you live and your expectations from yourself spiritually are that, then by definition, that's the way you perceive God. Because if that's what God wants from you, he's not a very loving, understanding God. So this guy really needed to completely redefine his spirituality, and he did. It's a work in progress, but he's not going to move past the way he feels about himself unless he redefines God and spirituality, and that's what he did. So I gave him some of David Aaron's books. He actually contacted Rabbi Aaron, and he, there's been some very, very serious changes because it's the whole picture that needed to be addressed, not just the sexual abuse. They go together, but he needed to redefine how he sees spirituality in order for him to heal from his trauma.
Yeah. I think they do go together because, when we talk about trauma, we talk about being stuck in a state of terror or fear. And like, what's more scary than the all being, all knowing truth of the universe is holding me up to a to-do list that if I don't do, I'm
Yeah.
messed up for all eternity. I mean, that's pretty scary. Um,
And in this world also.
yeah. And one of the things that goes back to that conversation you had where you flew to Washington is that, in the world that we live in, the perception of what spirituality is very black and white. And you came from that world, and I grew up unorthodox, but even I did, and when I encountered David Aaron's books when I was 17 years old, there wasn't that much of a push in the world that I grew up in that you have to learn all day long. But there still was this idea of like, are you good enough or not? And that's what Judaism was about. Did you do it or not? Like, yeah, we didn't have to learn all day, but like if we don't do it, the idea was we
Yeah.
didn't do it. And his books like completely took me, transformed like everything. So tell us a little bit about, this kind of black and from your perspective of like working with people and what they've gone through, how this black and white perspective is affecting people and how people can start to kind of grow out of that.
The black and white perspective is probably the biggest problem that it across all mental health issues. I shouldn't say all. I'm talking about the everyday stuff. I'm not talking about, psychosis or something like that. Um, but anxiety, depression, feeling inadequate, all like the stuff that humans struggle with. It's characterized by that type of thinking. Either I'm good or I'm bad. It's one or the other, right? Um, Either you're good or you're bad. Either you're nice or you're mean. Either I love you or I hate you. So the very binary way of thinking, the either or type of thinking causes a lot of pain, a lot of anxiety. Um, so spirituality is the opposite of that. In one of his books, Seeing God, Rabbi Aaron talks about He calls it seeing allness. And he talks about a study. Did we talk about this one? I don't remember, but it's a
I
very
don't think
interesting.
so.
So they did a study in the 70s or something about education. So kids were learning math. So 1 plus 1 is 2, right? And they did a study on kids who were taught math traditionally. And they also taught kids a different way of learning math, which is not by counting, but they had a paper of dots, like a bunch of rows with black dots. So the kids who learned traditionally, the way that they counted the dots was they counted the rows and then multiplied it. But there were kids who learned more holistically. They were able to look at the paper and know from looking at the whole paper without counting it how many dots there were, just from seeing the whole picture of it. That,
Wow.
yeah, it was fascinating. But it's a very good muscle, and he uses this to bring out what is the perspective of spirituality. So there's the ideas, but then there's like the field of vision that you have. So the field of vision is seeing the entire picture of something. That doesn't exclude the details. That just incorporates that into the picture. So we're good and we're bad, or maybe neither, right? There's good parts of us. There's parts of us that do things that help us. There's things that detract from where our goals are. But but both of those need to be able to coexist. Being able to see and experience yourself with both of those is very healing. Because if you're either good or bad, in all likelihood, you're bad. We've all done bad, right? Who hasn't done stuff that they regret, said things, done things. So then you're bad. Because if it's only either or, then you're a bad guy. So being able to see a bigger picture, which incorporates details, is very, very powerful and healing. Whether or not it's even perceived as a spiritual lens or just basic psychology, economic black and white thinking is one of the hallmarks that that cause a lot of stress in psychological theory. It's not just a spiritual. I personally look at that as a spiritual perspective. Being able to see the big picture of something, big picture of life, big picture of yourself gives is very, very healing.
It
Did
reminds
I
me
answer the
of,
question? I'm not sure if
yeah,
I answered the
yeah,
question.
yeah. It reminds me a story of the Baal Shem Tov about a couple who waited till their very late years to have a child. And they had a child that lived for a few months and then passed away. For 2 years, actually. The child lived for 2 years, finished nursing, and then passed away. And the couple came and said, how could you have blessed us? Like, how you saw our pain. Like, you know, you blessed us with a child. Like, we assume that you knew what kind of a blessing you were give. Like, how could you take a couple who's waited so long to have a child and do this?
Yeah.
And he revealed to them the story of that soul, which is actually a big no-no. Like, there's it's explained that when someone who knows the story of a soul in a past lifetime reveals it, they expose themselves to a lot of danger and repercussion. But he revealed the story just to help them understand what was going on with their pain. And I'm not going to tell the whole story, but the basic idea was this soul, it was an extremely, extremely special soul that did incredible things, but needed in order to finish its process to come down to a very special family and have a Jewish mother take care of it for 2 years. And they were chosen as the parents to facilitate what this soul needed. Um, so it was like we go through so much in life and so much torment of what was done to us or what we've done to others. And so much of spirituality is realizing like there's a bigger plan, there's a bigger picture, and that pain and that dark side, even including the things that we did, is all part of it and includes it. Um,
Yeah.
it's so integral in spirituality, but like you're saying, it's so integral in healing because on the one hand, it seems very woo-woo, but if you don't have that and you're living black and white, try staying sane and see how that works for you. You know,
Exactly. Yeah.
it's and where I've seen it, like I'm very into the somatic work, but in the somatic work, there's this idea of the container, growing the container of being able to allow ourselves to experience good parts, bad parts, interesting parts, aggressive parts, like and like having a big enough space to allow for all these experiences. So like healing and spirituality, like when you try to do either one of them really well, they constantly, at least in my perspective, and what's been fascinating, like speaking to you, is like, wow, I'm like, he gets it, is like they become the same thing. They really start to feel like it's hard to find the difference.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's like a car has four wheels. So psychology addresses psychology, not therapy depends on the therapist, what their approach is. But psychology is only about one wheel. So try driving a car with one wheel, right? It's not going to work. It's not even like it's sort of indispensable. You cannot be okay without having all four wheels. Now, the four wheels look different for everyone. You don't have to believe what I believe. You don't have to be Jewish. You don't have to believe. I don't even know if you need necessarily believe in God to have the fourth wheel, but you do need to have that type of thought process, the bigger picture, inherent self-worth, um, context. You have to have a why, not just a what. Psychology is the what. How do you deal with things? What causes problems and how do you address them? But yet, why should you? Why should you? And what's the reason to? Um, is that's one of the wheels on the car. So everyone's gonna have their own way of getting that wheel, again, whether it's Judaism or it's not Judaism. But without that wheel, the car is not going to drive. So I think any good therapy is going to have to be able to include all four wheels.
And and that also, I think, works the other way around too, which is that if to really be spiritual without having a good grasp on your psychology is quite difficult. And maybe you can give some perspective on that of like what you see the pitfalls and the where people will often trip up when they try to be very spiritual without getting a good grasp on their psychological state.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember the line Rabbi Aaron said. Like a lot of the spiritual seekers, they talk about expanded consciousness, right?
Hmm.
So he said, all right, your consciousness is expanded. Now what are you filling it with? Are you filling it with yourself? If you're filling with yourself, it's just an ego trip, right? So now you have more room to just to be obsessed with yourself. There's a lot of pitfalls to if you're focusing on spirituality without addressing your mental health, it can just be another escape. There's a lot of people, the psychedelic realm, let's say. So recently, psychedelics have become very popular for healing. Um, I've spoken to a lot of people. I find it very interesting, but there's definitely a lot of people who are using it to gain the experience. There's an experience that you have when you take psychedelics, a very, very spiritual experience. But that doesn't mean that you're healed. That's like that can just be another drug. People feel very good when they take heroin. They feel high, they feel connected, they can feel very godly. That doesn't mean that's not spirituality. Spirituality feels good, but feeling spiritual doesn't mean that you're spiritual. It very often can be used as an escape. So if you have lots of mental health problems, and then you go, God, 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 God. It's very common, especially in 12-step programs. Before my practice, um, I was a therapist and then director of a drug rehab. And I see that a lot with people who go through the 12 steps. Sometimes it's a way to avoid really working through their stuff because you feel great, you're connected to a higher power. And that's a very positive thing in itself. But if it's just used as a way to then avoid the sides of yourself that need to be addressed, your life's not going to look good. Your marriage is not going to look good. Your relationship is not going to look good. Business-wise, you're not going to because you're avoiding all the parts of yourself that need to be addressed and worked through that don't feel good to work through. It doesn't feel good to work through those things. It does when you work through it at the other end. And if you develop a taste, the work itself can be meaningful, but it's not a high. So spirituality as a high can be just another escape from working through your problems. When it's in the right context, then it changes everything in your life. But if it's just an escape, it's really just a drug. I don't even think of it as spirituality. One guy is, one guy likes heroin, crack cocaine. Another guy likes God. It doesn't do with God because if it's not permeating your life, then it's nothing to do with God. It's just a good feeling that you get when you talk about it. So then it's just a feeling. Feelings are not spiritual. They might activate a spiritual type of feeling, but feelings themselves are not spiritual. They're just good feelings.
Right. And then, I mean, getting back to what we were talking about, where spirituality is about bringing out your core essence in your life,
Yeah.
it's anything where you're escaping,
Yeah.
it's not. So what would your be advice what would your advice be to someone who's starting out, who feels kind of stressed and anxious and kind of feels disconnected from that core spiritual sense of value? Where would you suggest someone like that starts?
In terms of spirituality, healing, both.
Well, I think our discussion has revealed that they're very much
Oh,
connected.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think well, it depends also on I'm not a believer that everybody needs therapy. Some therapists think everyone should be in therapy. I think definitely don't think everyone should be in therapy because I don't think everyone's cut out for it. And I think therapy in the wrong context could be harmful if you're going to a therapist that's not trained well. So I'm not saying this guy should go to therapy, but there's a few principles that could be helpful. Um, let's start with spirituality. I guess you're right. It's all the same. Spirituality is very individual. So that's one concept that has to be integrated to heal. If you're used to being, this is what spirituality is, whether it's Limater or, I've spoken to Chabad people and they told me it's the same thing in Chabad with Shlichus. Your self-worth is, are you a Shliach or you're not a Shliach? If you're a Shliach, you're a good guy. If you're not, you're a failure. I don't think this is like a yeshivish problem. It's a human problem. We make everything black and white, all or nothing, and then that becomes the barometer of our value and success. So that's number one. It needs to be about who you are versus some external set of objectives that you need to accomplish. Those objectives could be part of your path, but they're not what define your path. They're an aid to bring out your who you are. That's one. Um, Developing a big picture. So if you've never asked yourself, why am I alive? What's the point? What am I trying to accomplish? It's going to be very hard to feel good about yourself and to move past your anxieties. Again, it really depends on the specifics because if the guy has, let's say, he has anxiety about um, fear of flying, he doesn't necessarily need a whole open heart surgery. I don't think everyone needs an open heart surgery. You don't have to ask you don't have to ask all these questions to be okay. Some mental health could be addressed by itself. But if someone's looking for a full transformation, then they do need to address those things. Um, what was I? Oh yeah. So it has to be very individualized. It has to be about who you are. You have to address the big picture. Where am I headed? Why am I here? What's the point of life? Not just how do I feel better? Because they're very linked. If you grew up from, there's another point that's very important. Rav Kook says it. There's a book I just read recently, The Spiritual Revolution of Rav Kook by Rabbi Schwartz. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a great book. But in there, he says a quote from Rav Kook I thought was really good. Some people confuse Yiras Shamayim with Yiras Hamachshava. And what he means is they think that Yiras Shamayim means that you don't think certain things, or that you don't allow yourself to think certain things. But that's just fear of thought. That's not fear of heaven. But that's very common if for someone who grew up from. There are beliefs that are untouchable. You have to believe certain things. Now, if you need to be able to question those. It doesn't mean you drop them, but if you're not open to really examining everything that needs to be examined, it's gonna be very hard to really, find a real authentic spirituality. You're gonna have to really, so that's a very important to me personally, that was something that I had to work through. I had to be ready to really challenge some beliefs about spirituality that are like olive bays. So you have to be ready to, whatever those beliefs are for you, you have to be ready to challenge them because if not, then those beliefs have ramifications. Some of them can be causing mental health problems. A lot of them are not even spiritual, even though people think they are. They're just sort of a cultural, black and white, childish belief, like about good or bad, versus what authentic hashkafa is, even within their own circle. I'm not the judge of what's authentic hashkafa, but if that person searches with, with the people who really worked through these things in their own group, their own rabbanim or whatever. Most of the time, the things that you think are critically important are just, a black and white perspective that's missing a lot of nuance. Um,
Wow.
yeah,
It's interesting because it's like sometimes because the spiritual experience has to be individual, it has to be about a person really seeking within and asking him or herself those questions. There's this threshold that we have to cross over, which is, are we willing to embrace the possibility that we'll disagree with everything we've been told?
yes,
And that's scary. Um, and some of us don't, but some of us find that living in that belief system to be so stifling that we have no choice but to start to
yes,
step over that line.
yes, yeah. It's interesting. I've personally found that like a lot of things that I understood in a black and white way years ago. So for a while, I'm like, all right, that doesn't make any sense to me. I don't believe that. But now I'm coming back to it, but from a whole new angle. Because it was never spirituality, just like good or bad. This is what this is what a spiritual person does. This is not what a spiritual person does. But once you advance and you develop the seeing allness, the big, that we talked about before, that the bigger picture. So then you could get to the core of some of the things that you grew up with that and actually incorporate those, but from a very new angle.
Right,
But there is a period where you have to be ready to challenge and maybe this is wrong. Or I shouldn't say that it's wrong. It's wrong for me. That makes it a lot easier. It's not about whether the belief is right or wrong. Maybe it is right. It's not relevant. It's not right for me, right? That black and white thinking, it's I'm bad or I'm good, but also either this belief is correct, either this is true or it's not. That also is black and white. It may be true for your next door neighbor. It's just not true for you. If it's not true for you, then it's not relevant if it's true for him, right? There are certain truths that are objective truths, at least in my opinion, but that's just my personal opinion. But I think everybody has to discover what those are for themselves. But, you know, whether something is true hashkafically, it makes it easier for someone to say you don't have to reject that as a truth. You just have to reject it as a truth for you. For your neighbor, maybe true. Like I have no problem if somebody believes that leaving out Torah 15 hours a day uh is true spirituality. I think it actually is true for some people. The problem is if you believe it's for everyone. The problem is if those people believe that that is the only way. Now they're entitled to their own beliefs, but then how are they going to, how are they going to educate their children? Because maybe for some of their children, that's not the path. So anytime that you're thinking it's good or bad, or this is the only path, this
right. So I think that, the I guess the number one thing to start with, when wanting to kind of grow is to start asking what is true for me, what resonates with me, and start being willing to question.
Yes. I think before that, though, you first have to believe that spirituality is about you. If you believe a set of externals, you're never going to get to the point where what you think has relevance. So the first thing you got to address is is real ruchnius, or if you're a firm person, right? Is real ruchnius about the actions that I do only, or are those cues to my essence? And then it's about you. It's about who am I? Then you can ask, all right, if it's about me, who am I? What's my strengths? What's my weaknesses? What's the point of being here? But
Got it.
the biggest hurdle for at least people who grew up from is what does ruchnias mean? Is right? Does it mean doing all the right checkbox actions? Or is that a means to cultivate and develop and bring out something deeper? That's where I see as the big point that people misunderstand. what they think is spirituality has nothing to do with spirituality. They might get a mitzvah. I'm sure they do. They're gonna go to Gan Eden. They're gonna get schar for the stuff they're doing. But if what they want is a meaningful ruchnius, that's not going to do it for them unless they go deeper.
Beautiful. I think we can end on that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
so anyone who's listening to this who would want to have a conversation with you about exploring this, how can they reach you?
So my website is chaimmoshesteinmetz.com. They can call me. I don't have time for conversations not therapy related just because I am very busy. But if they're interested in, consultation or starting therapy, they can contact me through my website or my number, 216-200-6294, which is it's a WhatsApp number. So it's available, you can reach me in Israel or anywhere else.
Great. Well, it was a wonderful
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
It
I
was
really enjoyed
really
it. Your
interesting learning about
questions
this
were
stuff.
great. Your questions were really very, very seeing allness type of questions. There's a lot in there. I mean, we could talk about it for a long time, but it was really, really important questions. And thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and then maybe we could do this again, going deeper into some of these perspective and some of these issues.
Yeah, I
Definitely
think
be
that's a good
happy to have
idea.
another one.